Dear Mrs. Hoffman, welcome to our show. Thank you for being here. Now, from what I understand, this is your first year here in Davos. What's your experience here? How do you feel about Davos?
I think it's both. I mean, I do think that there's, this is a corporate event. There's not any doubt about that from my point of view. And, you know, their overarching, goal is to have profitable companies, of course. But I think they come here looking for some bigger picture direction and with the idea that they are making the world a better place. And of course, that's what we hope as well, that we can all work together to make the world a better place. There's a lot of good analysis of problems at Davos, and we'd like to see more concrete actions on the solutions, because some of the solutions will change. In fact, all the solutions will change the way globalization operates right now.
Now, would you say that this organization is something that's dedicated more towards corporations and making bigger profits economy, or, as this organization likes to claim about itself, helping improving the state of the world?
Yes, I would agree with that, and that's why we have 10 trade union representatives here, maybe a little more even, but around 10, to kind of bring that message, and our message is, you want globalization 4.0, we need a new social contract 4.0, which actually empowers workers, stronger labor market institutions, stronger collective bargaining models, so that workers get their fair share out of globalization. Because what we've seen now is that we're not getting our fair share. The labor share keeps dropping over the past, 2 decades, increasingly in the past decade since the financial crash. The gap gets bigger, the labor share gets smaller, collective bargaining is continuously under attack from global institutions, from companies. And so what's the way out of that? We talk about inequality as a global crisis because we can't have demand to fuel our economies if workers aren't putting enough money in their pockets to even get by. And that's, in too many countries, that's the reality. So we need to take the anger factor that's out there that the World Economic Forum recognized. There's a big anger factor, there's distrust. And how do we change that? How do we create an environment where we have trust in our multilateral institutions, we have trust in globalization, everyone doesn't feel like, well, it only leaves me behind, and that we can move forward in a more positive way.
Now, we've been hearing a lot here in Davos about globalization, about fourth industrial revolution, about how the world is changing due to digital disruption, but we have been hearing a little bit about the so-called losers of globalization, but we haven't been hearing about workers, how to include them more into discussions about the future of societies, about the future of economy. Would you agree with that?
Well, when you say East, you mean all of Asia, or
Yes.
you mean Eastern Europe? Because I think even the problem of divergence between Western and Eastern Europe has been really pronounced. And the agenda that we have for Europe is that we have wage convergence, which doesn't mean wage depression in the West by any means, but we do want to lift up the wages in the East in particular. And UNI does a lot of work in Central and Eastern Europe to make that happen, with a big focus on how do we strengthen collective bargaining. The disparity of wages between Asia and the West continues, and that is also part of the agenda, is lifting wages everywhere. I don't want to say that the idea is that we keep depressing wages in the West in order to lift wages in the East. That's not the model that works. Workers in the West are also suffering. They've had flat wages essentially for a decade. Very modest increases, flat wages across Western Europe in the latest year, for which we have really good data, which is 2017, no real wage increase across Western Europe. That's not acceptable. And this is why you see some of the more nationalism, extreme right-wing movements emerging in these countries, and including in the US, because people feel left behind, and they think that, well, we're going to retreat behind our national borders, and that's the only way that we can get a positive outcome.
When you talk about globalization, the fact is that for a decent amount of time, the Western world has had huge issues with the price of labor in the Eastern world, which was much cheaper and much more affordable to global corporations. Now we see the rise of wages in the East. Do you think that in a certain moment of time, there will be some sort of equilibrium, and can we see at all a change in trends?
In the US, since the financial crisis, the net job growth has all been in insecure, low-wage jobs. For example, temporary agency employment or some part-time work, some platform work. We've seen that grow a lot. That's where we're seeing a lot of growth, or contract work. We haven't seen growth in full-time, secure work tied to the economic employers. So a lot of contractors, temp agencies, and so on. So this is really the dilemma that we need to confront. This is one of the biggest challenges for working people, is how do we restore the employment, and i.e., you know, you're not 3 steps away from your employer. You actually have an employment relationship. How do we make sure we don't have a lot of fake self-employed people out there, and they should be treated as employees, and employers should take on their responsibilities. So linking that employer responsibility with the millions of workers who are in these insecure, precarious situations, that's a key focus for UNI.
So you firmly believe that what we are seeing today are basically political consequences of this, what you're saying?
I don't think at all it's necessary. I think that we've been given this narrative that if you want digitalization, it has to come along with insecure work, and we reject that narrative completely. You have 80,000 workers for Google, for example, who work for temporary agencies. They're doing the same software development and all the other work that Google does alongside full-time Google employees. Why should they be employed by temp agencies? Nobody, I mean, you know, what's the answer to that question?
What's the explanation of Google for that?
I don't know what the explanation is, to tell you the truth. I suppose, you know, at some point the explanation was, well, we have projects and we don't know if they're going to continue or not. These are, you know, isolated projects. You don't have half your workforce working on projects. So, I mean, I have not, you know, I don't know the explanation, to tell you the truth. There is no good explanation. It's about saving money and reducing responsibility. So I think but that's just only one example. That's a glaring example. It's a rich company with a lot of employees. Amazon also has a lot of contract workers. Maybe you could argue they have an explanation that they have busy times and
circles within a year, or
but that doesn't mean they still couldn't work for Amazon during those times, you know, knowing that it was a short-term contract or a short-term relationship. So you know, this is not a narrative that we accept, that, oh, it's digital economy and therefore you have to, you know, put people 3 steps away from the real employer. That's not a narrative we accept, and it's been going on in the United States for quite some time, maybe 20 years. It's been increasing this, you know, fissuring of the workforce, and now it's even, you know, become even more pronounced.
And you believe that we are seeing political consequences of that today?
Of course, because if you work for a contractor and you don't work for Facebook, let's say the cleaners who work for Facebook, right? I mean, just example of a contractor, the cleaners aren't sharing in the profit of Facebook. They're getting whatever that contractor offers them. Anytime you're 3 steps removed from the actual employer that's earning the profit, your share diminishes. And this is, you know, this is a reality that has nothing to do with digitalization.
Finally, we've seen here results of a study made by Oxfam about 26 people in the world owning as much as more than half of the world's poorest population. Where do you think this kind of development will lead the world?
What's stunning about that is not only that it's 26, which is already, how can that be possible, 26, as much as, you know, billions, but the other point is that last year it was 43. So if it dropped from 43 to 26 in 1 year, where does it go next year? 10? 1? Jeff Bezos, will he be the one who owns as much as the bottom half? This is the trend we have now, and this is why really inequality is at crisis levels. It has been for years. We haven't done anything to turn it around, and we have to do that.
Mrs. Hoffman, thank you so much for being our guest.
Thank you very much.